Okay, so version 7.0 of the Tycho software has just now been released. So here is a short video to go over the new features that you can expect to see in this version. And at the end, there will also be a short demonstration of some of these features as well. So to get started, the first key item here is that the new version consumes a lot less memory during the synthetic tracking operation. So this will be of particular interest to those who like to process those really large sets of image files. The next item is that it has a new ruler measuring tool. So for those who like to measure distances between objects or perhaps a feature of a single object, this is a nice tool to have. The next item is a straight line position prediction tool, and I'll go over in more detail what that means in a moment and why you might use it under certain scenarios. And finally, the next item is now we have the ability to directly download and update the MPC orbital element file, which makes things a lot more convenient. Okay, so as I mentioned, memory usage has been dramatically reduced in the new version. And so I put together a chart to indicate a comparison between the old version and the new version. And so as you can see, here we have the synthetic tracker with 1 thread in operation, and over here the tracker with 3 threads in operation. So the old version would consume, and this is with a fairly decent sized data set of 3.5 gigabytes, which is not atypical of certain scenarios, but it's a way to drive the point home of the improvement. So the old version with 1 thread would consume almost 6 gigabytes of memory, whereas the new version now consumes a bit less than 4, and that's with 1 thread in operation. And then again, with 3 threads, you can see a much greater disparity now, with the old version consuming almost 11 gigabytes and the new version about 4.6. So even with multiple threads in operation, the new version is still consuming less than the old version with just 1. Okay, this next item is a new ruler measuring tool. And so this is of interest to those who like to measure the distance between 2 objects or perhaps some feature of a single object. Maybe it's a comet that they want to measure certain attributes of it. And so you could kind of do this to some degree with the old version. The way that worked is you would define marker 1 and marker 2. And so this would define 2 points from which a distance could be computed. Now, the only issue with that approach was that the markers want to gravitate, they want to latch on to the centroid of an object. Now, most of the time that's what you want, but there are certain scenarios in which you want to have more freedom, more flexibility as to the exact positioning of the marker. So that's kind of the whole purpose behind the ruler tool. It gives you that kind of freedom, and so it's another nice tool to have. Okay, so this next item is a straight line position prediction tool, and the motivation behind this feature is that someone had detected a near-Earth object and they were not sure if it was a new discovery or not, so they wanted to be able to follow it up next evening, 24 hours later, to get some additional observations on it. And so they plugged in their measurements into an ephemeris tool, and they were not able to recover it the next night. Now, as it turns out, the object was already known, and so they were able to go back and see where the object should have been. And it turns out that the ephemeris was not just inaccurate, but it was actually computing the position as though the object were traveling in the opposite direction. And so part of the explanation behind that was that the ephemeris tool had made certain assumptions about the proximity of the object, and it was also a very short arc of measurements, so it was a 15-minute arc of measurements that were collected that first evening. But it turns out that if he had simply computed a straight line prediction of where the object should be, that he would have been within 1 arc minute of the actual position, which is certainly more than adequate for placing the object within the field of view. So this is just another tool to have in the toolbox, and it can be very convenient and very useful in certain scenarios. Okay, so last but not least, we have the ability to directly download and update the MPCORB element file. And so this is another convenient feature to have. You no longer have to open up a web browser and point to a file location, download, extract, and copy it over. All you have to do is click a button and it will automatically download and update the file for you. So at this point, let's go ahead and take a look at a short demonstration. Okay, so the first feature that I will demonstrate is the new ruler tool, and there are two different ways to access it. First, you can right click and say create ruler, or you can go to this menu here and do the same. I prefer to right click just because it's more convenient. But before we do that, let me demonstrate how it was in the previous version if you wanted to compute a distance. So what you would do again with the previous version, and you can still do it in the new version as well, but you would say, let's suppose we want the distance between these two objects. So you would double click on one of the objects and create marker 1, and it would pop up this new window here and give you some information about marker 1. And then you would double click on the other object and say create marker 2. And now that you have both markers defined, you have a lot more information. You have the midpoint, obviously you have marker 1 and 2, you have the distance, time elapsed, and the motion. And so that gives you a lot of information. The only issue with that is that markers, again, they want to gravitate toward the centroid of the object, which most of the time that's what you want, but there are certain scenarios in which maybe you're measuring some other arbitrary distance or some feature of an object, and so in that case you want to have a bit more freedom as to where those markers are defined. And so that's the purpose behind the ruler tool. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the ruler tool. So again, you can right click, create ruler, and again we now have freedom to position it wherever we want. And then if we don't like where we wound up positioning the marker, we can always click edit, and it will allow us to recreate the marker. So we can zoom in and get even more fine detail that way. So as you can see, it's very easy to define these 2 points now, and as before we still have very accurate distance information. Okay, so this last feature to demonstrate is the straight line position prediction tool. And so the way this works is you use the marker tools. So marker 1 will be defined as the start point of the asteroid, and then as you can see the movement of the asteroid, then you can define marker 2, and it doesn't have to be at the very last position, but I'm going to do that for this demonstration. So with the position prediction tool, you can adjust the slider, and as you do that you can see the extension of the arc there, and so it's telling you in this window how many hours have elapsed since marker 2. So if we say 0 hours elapsed, then it's not going to give any prediction. If you say 1 hour, then you can see this is where the object should be in 1 hour time. 2 hours, it would be here, and so forth. So you can either specify an hour of your choosing, or you can adjust the slider in a similar fashion. So it's just a very convenient tool to use under those scenarios where you want to perform a quick follow-up of an object. Well, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.